Hello there, welcome back to another show. Today I'm looking at Ang Lee and his 60 frames per second experiment, which was not that successful to most people. It followed on from Peter Jackson, and he had done this for The Hobbit, which was also a thing that no one was particularly keen on. Other films, really. The Hobbit films weren't very good, but he did 60 frames a second experiment that most people just felt like made everything look fake and unimmersive and just weird, and it was a technical thing that didn't really translate to the audience, so it was never really brought on as something that people wanted. So that was given a miss. People just get fed up with it, but Ang Lee saw something there and he decided to keep going because he liked the idea of the 60 frames a second where you can see the details way in the back, way in the front. You can see details everywhere. Anywhere you can think of, you will find those details. And it's good in that way, but it also creates a fakeness to the imagery that feels very TV, and it's sort of used for, it's good for like sports, when you see all the detail in the background, foreground of someone playing sports. But in drama, it can look really, really fake, and it makes you feel you watch a cheap TV show that has very great detail, but it's still cheap. But Ang Lee has continued with these two films. I'm not sure they'll let him do another one like this, to be honest, because both these films didn't do well, and he'd been off a run of good films that had done well, and then this one, these two experiments just never really delivered what people wanted. So it was Billy Lynn's Long Halftime Walk and the Gemini Man, or Gemini Man, depending. I can't remember if it was either in the front of it or not. But these are two films I kind of like but don't love. Really, they have their problems. I mean, the problems are not just due to 60 frames a second, but they do have the problems. It doesn't feel that Ang Lee's using his best material. He's given the best material for these two films. But the actual presentation also creates a problem because you think, this doesn't quite feel right. This feels... no, something's wrong. But I'm also interested. The problem is, well, one of the big problems is, because you've got this distance from it, because you can see all the details, you're seeing too much, so you can't focus in. And the film language for this type of thing has not been worked out. The way that basically the film evolved was, you got the pictures, then you got the moving pictures, then eventually you got the sound, and each time that happened, you actually found a way to have the medium adapt to that. So when you had silent film, you had the moving pictures, so they found ways to create a language that would adapt to those limitations. You had things saying what people were saying, but a lot of time they would find ways to visually tell you the story without having any of those annoying lines that brought the pace up. So they found a way, so you had like a good 15 years of really great silent films. Then when sound came, they had to adapt, so you got a lot of early silent films that were either too talky or they were basically, early as a sound film, they were either really talky or because people were trapped with the cameras that couldn't move because the sound equipment was so huge, or you had basically silent films with little bits of talk every so often. Eventually evolved, the technology got better and they evolved and they found a happy medium. It's just some of us who like the silent film era better. Because honestly, apart from someone like Howard Hawks who knew how to use language, a lot of the early films with sound, I think, are quite hard to watch unless you get someone who knew what they're doing. Unless you had a really good director doing it, they could figure it out and create really good language and really good storytelling. A lot of the time it would be just talky and explain. It's basically TV. A lot of you look at a lot of sound era films from the 30s and 40s. If they're not done by a good director, they're basically feel like TV. And they're basically episodic films like Sherlock Holmes films or Tarzan films. That's all they are. I like some of those films, but that's what they are. And when it continued and evolved, you went widescreen eventually, and you had the advancement of TV and how that changed filmmaking and how it got more experimental with the Europeans. And people, it always evolved. We always found a language for the new technology. So the handheld cameras gave some a new language that could really advance it. You know, CGI, from practical to CGI, gave filmmakers a new language that they could either use or abuse. And there's a lot of abuse for that one. Well, it wasn't intention, it was just that's what happened. Because there's a lot of filmmakers who are very good that take technology and do terrible things. If you look through all of cinema history, there's been lots of examples of that. It's just that we only remember the good stuff because the bad stuff gets forgotten about. It's the same with the bad CGI stuff will eventually be forgotten about, you just see the good stuff. So now you've got this 60 frames a second, and it's the language hasn't worked out. You're watching this film, sometimes it feels interesting, like you're seeing something in the location, and the location isn't romanticised at all. It just feels like you're there in a room, like it is like watching someone on a video camera, and that can be interesting if you do it right. But the language of video and the language of this 60 frames a second has never been really worked out, because you have to compromise and make a film that also can play in 24 frames a second. You can't actually cut the language into a new way of seeing things, a new setup of shots and counter shots that actually create an emotion that you are fascinated by, that creates a sense of forward momentum and forward interest, that gets rid of the stuff that's not interesting at all. But you don't have that because barely anyone's used this 60 frames a second technology. No one's worked it out. I've got the feeling it'll end up being, because the problems with this is actually going into VR, because they have to use that kind of setting as well, so everything's clear and about them. So whatever the technology is, they'll have to find a language for it to make it some emotional film. Because if there's no emotion in the film, or no like dramatic subtext that get people engaged, it's just a technology and no one cares. And they haven't worked that out. Ang Lee's trying these films. He's obviously trying to figure something out, but everything's so bright and all the rest of it, I don't think he's quite worked out. But he's a talented guy, so you get two films that aren't bad, they're just not him at his peak. Because you get moments you're into, and then there's moments where you're just lost all interest, because it's like it's too fake, and it's like, so you get, I mean, close-ups are quite good in this thing. When you get the close-ups, you can do some interesting things. You can see a lot of detail, and it's fascinating. And far shots can be really interesting. You see really far away and really close, and you can create an emotional effect. There's moments in here in this film where you're seeing something, you're seeing the fighting. It doesn't look like a normal fighting scene you would get in a normal film, but they're shooting something, and you see it far away where it hits, and it creates an explosion. It's like, that's interesting. That's much more like violence is. It's not high impact, not sentimentalised in any way. It's just brutal. And there's a moment where he's fighting someone, and it's much more rough and ready, and it's with a knife, and it actually feels pretty brutal. So there's a usage there. So Ang Lee sometimes gets it right. There's other times when and it's really the medium shots where you're in a small room or a normal sized room that feels just fake, even though it's showing you the room as it is. It just feels like they haven't either worked out the lenses right or the lighting right or something, but they have not worked out how to make this feel emotionally engaging. And that's the problem with these two films, is they work it out sometimes. Sometimes they've got something there, and other times they've got nothing. So there's an issue there. It's just a problem issue that they haven't worked out. It's less of an issue in Gemini Man. Gemini Man is it's closer to probably what he wanted, but you still have those moments of just fakery, and it feels more fake because I tried to do it on a big budget action movie, and I don't think it quite works. I think some of the action, you get moments in the action where all the detail in 16 per second looks really interesting, because you're seeing people in real locations doing things that looks dangerous and looks, oh, that's pretty brutal. And other times it looks really fake, because they have not worked out the language of how does this look in 60 frames a second to be really effective. There's just not enough material, not enough language to figure it out. How does it look? How do you fake stuff here? And it just feels like you're seeing two films that are the early process of something that might work eventually, but you need to make some of the mistakes to get them to work. And I don't think 60 frames a second does blockbusters well. I mean, I think Billy Lynn is a much better film. I was much more engaged in that film than I was in Gemini Man in those frame rates. And Gemini Man's taken a genre which I like, as a hitman retiring and he's dragged back into life by the machinery of his old life, and it turns out this time the person killed him was a younger version of himself. I mean, that film is every cliche that's in there that I enjoy, because it's my kind of silly film. But it's not a particularly great film, and the 60 frames a second just means that sometimes you're getting really good detail and sometimes you're getting pulled out because it feels like a TV show. And it just has not been worked, and the lenses have not been worked out to really cover it. I mean, that's the big thing I've found with both these films, is the lens usage is sometimes great, sometimes not so great. And a lot of time you feel they're covering because they know that the film has to go out in a cinema as well that doesn't play 60 frames a second. So you're compromising and stuff that will look good in 24 frames that will look bad in 60 frames. And it means it's not a pure experiment. It's not. They try to use a budget to try experiment with this, but it's not pure. So you create this thing that's not quite one thing or the other. So in a lot of ways, like the Gemini Man is actually easier to watch at 24 frames a second, because if it was more like a film there and you actually get more of the engagement, it means you miss out on some of the cool stuff they do in 60 frames a second when it works. Now, I want to put the thing with this is, some old films were made like 20 frames a second. Like Passion of Joan of Arc was 20 frames a second, and it created a sense of realism in silent cinema that was really wonderful. So you change the frame rate is interesting, but you need to know what you're doing, and it's complicated. And just doing this thing, we're making a big budget film, and we've two versions of it, just usually means you can't really focus on the version that needs to work, which is the thing you want to do in the first place. So these become two compromised films, but they don't need to be compromised. The films themselves, as I said, Gemini Man, it's a bit pap, really. I mean, it's like Will Smith versus a younger version of Will Smith. I enjoyed it because I like that kind of movie, but if you don't like that kind of movie, you're going to hate it. There's nothing new there. There's absolutely nothing new. The acting's quite nicely done, everyone underplays, but there's nothing new under the sun in this film. And, it's a genre film that it's happy to be a genre film. Just with that one thing, Will Smith versus Will Smith. Billy Lynn's long half-time walk is more enjoyable. It's the idea of a guy coming back from the war, and he's through this, because he did a bit of bravery, it was caught on camera, and he's now a big hero, but he's a bit traumatised by the experience. He never really wanted to be in the army in the first place, and it's about the kind of, does he go back or does he stay? He's starting to get some relationships with people, and his sister wants him to leave because she's really worried about him, and she feels guilty because her mistakes is what caused him to join in the first place. I really enjoyed the film as a whole because it's about the complication of being a soldier. It's not just about, if you're a soldier or a psychopath, you're wrong. It's much more like, and also even a war you know is not right. And then, do you go back and try and help the situation out and make sure nothing falls into anarchy because you're in a bad political situation, or do you just walk away? And it's a bit of a complication of that, and how he comes to the realisation he should stay and try and help his fellow soldiers survive this horrible situation. And it also goes into the idea about how the media is just selling this war to make tons of money, and how the people that go to the war are the ones who cannot afford anything. It's just basically a rich man exploiting a poor man, as always. It's all about that, and how traumatising that is to deal with, and how you may get all the commendations, but it doesn't reflect on money or anything. It doesn't reflect on anything. And also the idea that a lot of people who have this praise don't know how to deal with it at all. They're too immature to deal with it, and so it's complicated and interesting. But again, it's usually feeling the script needed another pass or two before it was ready to go. So there is that. But what can you do? That's just what happens sometimes. They're still good. They're still good fun films, but they're two lesser Ang Lee films. I like a lot of his films more than I like these two. And the experiment doesn't help because I think it creates a thing where he's in two different worlds a lot of the time. He's trying to do one thing in one frame rate and one thing in another frame rate, and it's like, I don't think it really helped. But I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope I didn't rant on too long about the weirdness of film technology or anything. It's just a little video about frame rates. So I'll be back for another one soon. Okay, bye for now.